Boys and girls of every age, would you like to see something strange? Come with me and soon you will see how I set up for Halloween. Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well, and thank you for tuning into Moose Motion. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if you're new, and be sure you have your post notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the new content. Anyway, thank you for your support, it's highly appreciated. So during this tutorial video, we'll be learning how to make our very own Jack Skellington out of clay. And whilst we go about making this Nightmare Before Christmas character, we'll be sharing some fun facts about the film itself as well. So to start off this tutorial, we'll be making a skeleton of Jack Skellington. That's a little bit of a tongue twister, but essentially you want to make some armature wire into a bit of a frame for the actual skeleton. And then for the bone part of things, we're going to use some oven-baked clay to essentially give this, well, skeleton some structure. There, I got it this time. Now, on to some interesting facts about the movie itself. The Nightmare Before Christmas was worked on by a team of 100 people and took 3 years to finish. And, well, seeing how I usually like to do photo countdowns for a lot of my short animations, this is probably the most shocking fact. It took a total of over 109,000 frames or photos to make this entire movie. That's just a little mind-staggering, because I think the most I've done so far is over 3,000, and that took about 3 months. So yeah, I can see why it took quite a few years to finish this film. The movie was based off a 3-page poem written by Tim Burton himself, and partially came from inspiration during, well, some shopping center arrangements, oddly enough. Apparently, he was, well, shopping around the time that Halloween was coming to a close, and a lot of the decorations for Halloweens, like goblins and ghouls, were being replaced by, well, Christmas decorations. So basically that apparently got his creative juices flowing, and he decided to make the Nightmare Before Christmas. Now back onto the armature doll. Once you get your skeleton actually arranged in a good position that you like, with enough space for all the joints between the bones, it's time to add on the plasticine layer. In this case, we're adding a nice thin layer of black because, well, it's Jack Skellington's suit and it's, well, iconically black. Now, a fun fact about, well, Jack Skellington's suit. Apparently, the original concept was supposed to be all black, believe it or not. However, they found out that, well, basically his black suit was blending a little too well into the background of some of the sets, so they decided to give him the white pinstripes, which we will do later on, which is, unfortunately, a big time sink and took a lot longer than expected, and which is why I'm behind schedule, unfortunately, with this video, because yeah, that took about 3 days to do those, unfortunately. And one thing I should probably mention, obviously I know Jack Skellington's, well, suit itself was made out of cloth, and mine's obviously plasticine, just very thin sheets of it, which definitely helps out with the sculpting process for small clothing layers. I've done this in the past before. I must admit my sewing skills aren't the greatest, so that's one slight disadvantage I kind of have. It would have been nice to be able to, sew things up, but I don't really have time to learn that, unfortunately, and sculpt things at the same time. And, well, it's the medium that I'm most comfortable with, so I'm able to actually pump things out fairly quickly. Well, except for this guy, it took 2 weeks. Now we'll go back to some interesting facts about the movie again. Obviously, we're going to be bouncing back and forth in between subjects. Basically, once I feel like the sculpture's gotten to a certain point where I need to give some more, well, brief iteration on actually what's taking place, then I'll give you a bit brief voiceover on what basically kind of work is taking place. For those of you who are trying to make your own Jack Skellington, obviously there's plenty of text for you to follow along with the build. Danny Elfman was the composer for most of the music during The Nightmare Before Christmas, and obviously he's a good friend of Tim Burton as well. And oddly enough, he was also the singing voice for Jack Skellington, because oddly the actor who was playing the voice for Jack Skellington couldn't sing, so basically Danny Elfman stepped up to the plate. And apparently it was one of the easiest jobs that he apparently ever had, because he apparently had a lot in common with Jack Skellington. And another interesting thing I found about Mr. Elfman is apparently he suffers from stage fright quite a bit. Apparently a lot of the cast on, well, The Nightmare Before Christmas kind of do. I remember one of the animators stating that basically stop-motion animators are kind of like shy actors. They just have the puppets do things for them, which I must admit I am not that far off the mark either. I'm not usually big on showing my face on camera, but once in a while there's, you'll get a peek of me. Not too frequently, but I'm there. And technically there is a mini-me always in the intros and various other parts in Claymation, so there's that as well. And one other interesting fact about Tim Burton himself, which apparently him and I kind of have in common, apparently a lot of his early work actually has a miniature doll of himself as well. So apparently it's not uncommon for a lot of artists at the beginning of their careers to basically use themselves as a reference. Odd. At any rate, The Nightmare Before Christmas used a odd set of frame rates, to be honest, for the film, which I'm not entirely familiar with and kind of want to experiment with at some point. So what they were doing was basically 12 shots were taken in order to make 1 second of footage. So usually what I work with is 2 and 24. They did have 2 scenes in the movie that did have 2 and 24, which I believe were the bugs falling into Oogie Boogie's pit, as well as the very beginning when you're basically getting the narration of the film, as well as the close-up of all the, well, different doors that Jack Skellington has options to go through, which will lead me to my other fun fact. In 2001, Disney wanted to actually make a sequel to The Nightmare Before Christmas called The Unlucky Clover. However, Tim Burton himself actually owns partial rights to the film, seeing how he's the one that kind of came up with the idea in the first place, and basically he said no, that's not going to happen because he feels like it'll ruin the film's authenticity. So that leads to a bit of a sad fact that we will probably actually never see a sequel to, well, The Nightmare Before Christmas, even though there's several different doors for Jack Skellington to go through, and there are several different theories behind each one of those doors, and apparently there's even more doors than that we were shown, so there's quite a bit of lore into this film if you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it, but we're just here to kind of cover the basic facts. Speaking of which, the main voice actor for Jack Skellington was Chris Sarandon. However, earlier mentioned that Danny Elfman was the singer for Jack Skellington because, well, apparently that guy could not sing. As well as Danny Elfman apparently played a few different other characters, like the clown with the tearaway face at the very beginning of the, well, movie, who was there in a flash and gone without a trace, haha, pun intended. Now, one thing I should mention that is neither sculpture related nor movie fact related is, well, I usually have a little competition going on for those of you who are new, who don't know who Milton the Moose is. Well, he's the goofy-looking character that is kind of the profile picture of the channel, as well as my other, well, social media feeds. And, well, he generally pops up sometimes during the making of these videos, and if you timestamp correctly when he shows up, you'll get a shout-out in the next how-to video. And here's a hint, if you're this far, he's already come and gone, and he's pretty easy to spot this time, because he's kind of got glowing red eyes. Now, he does show up at the end of the video, but that doesn't count, so you have to spot him during the tutorial section, essentially. So good luck, dear viewers. Now back to some fun facts about the film. Now, the 2 hardest shots apparently to accomplish in the entire Nightmare Before Christmas was the reflection when Jack Skellington was essentially opening the door to Christmastown. Now, I can see that being quite a nightmare, pun intended, to try and accomplish that because of the reflection and all the lighting would have to be very perfect. Now, the other hardest shot in the film apparently was, well, when Oogie Boogie was apparently dancing around without the sack on and he was just a bunch of, well, bugs, and personally, I can see that one being the hardest. Just due to the sheer number of insects moving around, apparently that few shots that were like that took up to about a month or 3 weeks, apparently. Now we're going to share some fun facts that will basically correlate to, well, the doll itself as well as the film. Now what I'm doing here with some tinfoil may be a little out of the ordinary for a vast majority of my armature dolls, but it's the same thing that they were doing on, well, the film set for Nightmare Before Christmas. So basically the idea behind the tinfoil is you sandwich it between 2 thin layers of cloth, or in my case plasticine, or paper for Santa's, well, naughty and nice list, and basically that allows you to actually manipulate the clothing and it will actually hold its own shape. So that's how you're able to actually animate cloth and various other things in films. It seems a little weird, but it actually makes a whole lot of sense, and it's pretty simple when you come right down to it. So nice fun fact for anyone else out there trying to make their own little armature dolls. Tinfoil comes quite in handy. Now, a fun fact about the film set itself. Now, apparently, all the lights were set up to an alarm system, so if there were any light bulbs that were basically burnt out or slightly bumped out of shape, there would be an alarm going off letting the animator know that they basically need to stop what they're doing and check their equipment. Now, that seems a little fussy, but that's honestly not a really bad idea when you really think about it, because I can kind of relate to that. Unfortunately, there was a segment when I was animating with a Wendigo, and my pug decided she was going to decide to get a little closer and walk into a light, and I lost 336 frames, which was about 8 hours of work. To put that in correlation for like CG animation, it would be like if your computer basically just set on fire. And apparently, if there was, well, one problem with a single frame in any of these shots during the animation of, well, the Nightmare Before Christmas, the animator would have to start over again. So, I'm sure there were a few fires. Now, one thing about Tim Burton's films in particular that is fairly well known, that basically a lot of his, shows or movies essentially have hidden references or little Easter eggs to various other films that he has worked on, and, The Nightmare Before Christmas definitely has its fair share of little Easter eggs. A good example of this is, Jack Skellington's dog himself, which is also known as Zero. Technically, his little, glowing nose is a pumpkin or a jack-o'-lantern, as well as apparently that dog has a, correlation to several other dogs in various other films of his. And another good example of this in The Nightmare Before Christmas is, generally speaking, a lot of the gifts under the, Christmas trees are kind of hidden, Easter eggs as well. For example, the snake, and I believe there's technically a Mickey Mouse pajamas and Donald Duck pajamas and various other weird cartoon characters that really have no business being there. But it's kind of cool. If you're paying attention, you will actually spot them a lot of the time, as well as there's been different references to, another popular series that Tim Burton is really well known for, which is, Beetlejuice, obviously, which, oddly enough, also has references to Jack Skellington, and actually Jack Skellington makes his very first appearance on Beetlejuice on one of, I believe it's a carnival hat. I'm not too familiar with that, so if someone can let me know in the comments below, because I'll admit I have never actually really watched a whole lot of Beetlejuice. Now time for more facts that correlate to the doll as well as the film themselves. Jack Skellington had over 400 heads with different, various expressions and different emotions shown on them, to basically replace heads frame by frame, which is pretty crazy if you think about it, but at the long run, if you think of it this way, the time between frames swapping heads is a lot shorter than it is manipulating mouths by sculpting them, which is generally what I do, and it's quite a painstaking process, and I can see why a lot of big studios just do the whole head or face swap. And speaking of face swaps, technically Sally, his, pumpkin queen, had to have her face swapped out with different various masks, mainly because her hair was too long and would have gotten in the way of trying to replace the head every time. And yeah, I can speak from experience there. Long hair is generally a bit of a pain in the butt to animate. Now, obviously, I don't have the time or budget to make 400 different heads, so I'm just going to make a few different heads that I figure would be, fairly common for Jack's facial expressions, and I have one that's a fairly kind of blank slate, so that way I'll be able to use pieces of plasticine and manipulate the mouth with different various paper cutaways and, different eyebrow attachments, and then probably manipulate some other various skulls in the future, so that way I can kind of use these ones instead of just for beauty shots, but that's, future me problem. Screw that guy. And for those of you who are curious, technically these heads are a different medium than the rest of his body. His body is plasticine clay, and his heads are oven-baked clay, so that way I don't have to worry about the boiling effect while I'm swapping different heads out. Now, that being said, unfortunately, being oven-baked clay, it is prone to mistakes. Well, here to share a rather embarrassing moment. Unfortunately, slightly overcooked a few Jack Skellington heads here. As you can see, it is well done. For those of you who are maybe a little less unaware of what oven clay should actually look like when it's cooked, it should look like that, not this. So, yeah, that was a minor setback, but at least I'm slightly back on track, but yeah, that took a lot longer than expected. Anyway, let's get back to it, this scary face. As you can see, this project has been a slight nightmare before Halloween, pun intended. Now, I find with the sculpty clay or the oven clay that I particularly use, or a lot of different products that are very similar, it's a little softer in comparison to plasticine and requires a bit more of a delicate touch, so if you can, definitely some rubber sculpting tools are really handy here to kind of, help avoid your fingers from smushing and kind of overheating things, because it's kind of got a weird middle ground where if you work it too much, it gets too warm and then it gets soft, and then, obviously if you bake it, then it gets rock hard, so it's kind of a weird product to work with, but at the same time, too, it is definitely great considering it didn't crack at all when it was baked at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, God, that was a bad idea. Don't think about food when you're sculpting. That's another lesson that you should all learn. And if you've enjoyed the content so far and would like to continue learning and while watching various other sculpting projects and perhaps a few short cartoons that I've made, be sure to check out the links in the post description below. That is, after you've watched this video. Now that we're kind of coming close to the end of this project, I'll cram in a couple more interesting facts about the film before we get on to the beauty shots here. And, there's just a bit of painting involved, and then you'll get to see some close-ups of the entire sculpture. Now, apparently the Nightmare Before Christmas did cause quite a bit of controversy at some of the Disney studios here, with some of the people apparently in the higher up areas basically saying it wasn't appropriate for children, obviously causing some delays. The film was originally going to be released under Disney's logo, but then was switched to Torchstone Studio, I believe, in the last minute because, well, there was some controversy, obviously. And then in 2006, they decided to switch it to the Disney logo because, well, apparently it did well enough, which is a little annoying, but it did okay overall in the box office, making $75 million after some re-releases. Now onto the beauty shots. Hello, and thank you for sticking around to the very end of the video, and I just want to wish you a very happy Halloween, and be sure to stay safe out there. At any rate, enough from me. Till next time, take it easy.